5 political unions collapsed so spectacularly that they make the European Union's problems look like a minor disagreement. Understanding why they failed will completely change how you see modern alliances like NAFTA and ASEAN. We are talking about unions that began with celebrations and ended with wars, economic disasters, and in one case, over 100,000 deaths. Here is what makes political unions so fascinating. The European Union has survived debt crises, Brexit, and massive political disagreements among 27 countries. NAFTA transformed into USMCA and keeps functioning despite constant complaints. ASEAN coordinates 10 Southeast Asian nations with very different governments. These unions work, barely, because they learned from the catastrophic failures that came before them. The 5 unions we are covering today ignored every warning sign. Let's start with the Soviet Union, because when people think failed political union, this is the one that changed the world. From 1922 to 1991, the Soviet Union held together 15 republics spanning 11 time zones under communist rule. This wasn't just a political union, it was an empire disguised as a federation where Russia dominated everyone else. The Soviet Union actually worked for decades through sheer authoritarian force. The Communist Party controlled everything, dissent was crushed, and the military kept rebellious republics in line. But the whole system was built on a lie. The Soviet Union claimed to be a union of equal socialist republics, but Moscow made all the decisions. The cracks started showing in the 1980s when Mikhail Gorbachev introduced glasnost and perestroika. The idea was to reform the system. Instead, it exposed how much people hated being part of the Soviet Union. Once people could speak freely, they immediately started demanding independence. By 1991, the Soviet Union was falling apart. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia declared independence. Then Ukraine held a referendum and 92% voted to leave. When Ukraine left, it was over. The Soviet Union officially dissolved on December 26, 1991. The aftermath was economic collapse across all former Soviet states. Hyperinflation in Russia hit 2,500% in 1992. Conflicts erupted everywhere. The ruble became worthless. Millions lost their life savings. Compare that to the European Union, which has held together despite massive economic disparities, despite Brexit, despite crises. The difference is that the European Union gives member states real autonomy. Countries can leave. There is actual democracy. The Soviet Union had none of that. Now let's talk about the United Arab Republic, which failed so fast it's almost impressive. In 1958, Egypt and Syria merged into one country under Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. The goal was to create a powerful pan-Arab state. It lasted 3 years. Egypt had 26 million people, Syria had 4 million. Egypt ran everything. Syrian politicians were sidelined, Syrian businesses were nationalized, and Cairo made decisions about Syrian agriculture without consulting Damascus. Syria went from an independent nation to an Egyptian colony in months. The economic policies were a disaster. Nasser imposed Egypt's socialist model on Syria's market economy, causing businesses to fail. Syrian military officers, demoted and replaced by Egyptians, finally had enough. In 1961, they launched a coup. The union dissolved after 1,095 days. Here's what's wild. Look at ASEAN today. 10 Southeast Asian nations, democracies, communist states, military dictatorships, monarchies, all cooperating economically, despite having completely different political systems. How? Because ASEAN does not try to merge countries or impose one system on everyone. They coordinate trade and security while respecting sovereignty. The United Arab Republic tried to force unity, and it failed immediately. But guess what? The United Arab Republic lasted at least 3 years. The Mali Federation lasted 2 months. In 1960, Senegal and Mali formed a federation just as they were gaining independence from France. Senegal wanted a loose federation with autonomy, while Mali wanted a centralized government. Senegal's economy relied on ports and trade. Mali was landlocked and agricultural and desperately needed Senegal's coast. The power imbalance was massive. Within 2 months, political fights became so intense that Senegal's president expelled Mali's delegation and dissolved the federation. Mali tried to send troops, but Senegal blocked the railways. The Mali Federation collapsed faster than a celebrity marriage. NAFTA, by comparison, has survived 30 years of complaints from all 3 countries. Mexico worried about United States dominance. The United States complained about jobs moving south. Canada had concerns about both, but it worked because it was just a trade agreement, not a political union. Countries kept their sovereignty and just agreed on economic rules. The Mali Federation tried to merge everything at once, and it lasted 60 days. Now, here is where things get dark. The Federation of Yugoslavia lasted from 1945 to 1992, and when it collapsed, the resulting wars killed over 130,000 people. Yugoslavia united 6 republics with multiple ethnicities, 3 major religions, and deep historical grievances. For decades, it worked. Marshal Tito held it together through authoritarian control and by balancing power between ethnic groups. But everything depended on Tito personally managing ethnic tensions. When Tito died in 1980, nationalist politicians immediately started using ethnic identity to gain power. Serbia wanted dominance. Croatia and Slovenia wanted independence. Economic inequality created resentment. By 1991, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence, and Serbia responded with military force. Then came Bosnia's declaration in 1992, triggering the Bosnian War. Ethnic cleansing followed. The siege of Sarajevo lasted 1,425 days. At Srebrenica, 8,000 Bosnian Muslims were massacred. The wars did not end until 1999, when NATO intervened. Yugoslavia tore itself apart in the bloodiest European conflict since World War II. Even today, 30 years later, the Balkans still deal with ethnic tensions and disputed borders. That is how catastrophically a union can fail when grievances are not addressed. The European Union learned from this. When the European Union expanded into Eastern Europe, they required countries to resolve ethnic disputes before joining. They created funds to reduce economic inequality. The European Union has problems, but it has not collapsed into war because it learned from Yugoslavia's mistakes. And finally, the East African Federation, which is failing in slow motion. Since 2000, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan have been trying to form a political federation. They have created a customs union, talked about a single currency, and an eventual political merger. But 24 years later, it is going nowhere. Trade barriers still exist. The currency keeps getting delayed. Political integration is stuck because nobody trusts anyone else. Kenya is the economic powerhouse, and everyone fears Kenyan dominance. The whole thing is paralyzed by distrust, economic inequality, and unwillingness to give up sovereignty. Compare this to ASEAN, which has existed since 1967 and actually functions. ASEAN does not try to create a political federation. It focuses on economic cooperation while letting each country maintain full sovereignty. The East African Federation is trying to do too much. Here's what connects all these failures. They all tried to force unity without addressing fundamental problems. The Soviet Union ignored that nobody wanted to be part of it. The United Arab Republic let Egypt dominate Syria. The Mali Federation could not agree on basic structure. Yugoslavia held together only through Tito's authoritarianism. Meanwhile, the unions that work, the EU, NAFTA, USMCA, and ASEAN, learned to start small, respect sovereignty, and build trust gradually. They have massive problems, but they survive because they do not try to force countries to give up independence. The lesson? Political unions require patience, genuine equality, and addressing real concerns. Rush it, ignore power imbalances, or rely on one strong leader, and you get catastrophic collapse. Which union's collapse shocked you most? Drop it in the comments.